Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. I've picked up a copy of Warhammer Quest Darkwater, and now I have a ton of minis to paint and not much free time to paint them. The box comes with a load of great looking miniatures, but I'm a busy guy, so join me in a new series where I show how I'm going to paint the minis, using as many tricks as I know to speed up the process without sacrificing on quality. The first minis I'm going to paint are the Cankerborn, so join me as I paint up the large bad guys in next to no time. First of all, I've primed the mini black. This is because I'm going to apply a Zenithal underpaint to this model. At first with Mechanica Standard Grey, I'm removing most of the paint off my brush onto a paper towel as I'm going to apply a dry brush all over the miniature. This doesn't need to be an overly dry brush as the first pass will be more of an overbrush, but make sure that the brush isn't loaded too much to end up painting the miniature rather than overbrushing. I'm sweeping my brush quickly over the model so only the raised areas are coated with Mechanica Standard Grey. This will leave the black showing in all of the deepest recesses while catching most of the model with the dark grey. To paint these models as quickly as possible, I'm going to be using some speed paints to help build the base layers and add some shade to the minis. So to help with that, I'm applying a Zenithal undercoat to help make the effects of the speed paint and contrast paints more prevalent. As this work before the actual painting can take a while, you could apply this to all of the minis from the box first, so you don't have to do it to every mini as you go to paint each one. The first dry brush should cover most of the model with Mechanica Standard Grey, leaving just a little bit of black showing in the deepest shadows. After the dry brush has been applied, there should be just a small amount of the primer still visible. Now with some Dawnstone, this time I'm going to be just a little bit lighter with this dry brush than with the previous one. I want to just leave a small amount of Mechanica Standard Grey visible in the darker areas and cover all of the raised areas with the Dawnstone. This Zenithal is going to build a transition from the darkest shadows to the brightest areas that the light would catch, working in a few layers of dry brushes. Once I've applied some contrast paint all over this, it will allow the undershading to show through, saving me from having to spend ages applying shades and then brightening some areas back up. Across all of the models in the box, this technique will save me a lot of time while still keeping the details to the model and the quality to the paint scheme. So I want there to be quite a lot of Dawnstone on the model. When I've done a couple of passes of the dry brush, this should be focused onto the most flat areas and raised details. With the Dawnstone applied, the model is starting to brighten up. So now with Administratum Grey, I'm applying another dry brush all over the model. I'm being slightly lighter again than on the Dawnstone layer, so I'll leave some of the previous layer showing, but catch the details that would catch the light with some Dawnstone. With this dry brush, the difference between the darker shaded areas and the lighter raised details should really start to stand out. This difference is what the speed paints will sit on, giving the transition from light to shadow in a single layer. There should only be a tiny amount of black showing now, with a transition between the greys built up, giving a nice smooth transition from that light to dark. Administratum Grey is great to have as the lightest grey, as it is quite bright, but I've worked up to it from the Mechanica Standard Grey, which gives a really nice variety to the tone of grey used. With the Administratum Grey dry brush applied, the transition to shadow is really visible. And finally, with some White Scar, I'm going to apply one final dry brush. I'm mostly going from the top down with this dry brush so it will catch the areas that the light would catch on the model. I want this to cover quite a lot of the model still, but if there are areas that are underneath others, or in the inside of arms and legs for example, if the White Scar doesn't reach there, it's okay, because that will really bring out the shadow effect of the model. As these steps can take a while, it's best to do as many models as possible at once. If you can spend an evening Zenithal undercoating the whole box while watching a film or something, it will allow you to then get on and paint the rest of the models without having to do this every time you get some free time to paint a few minis. The white scar is really upping the contrast on the model, but it still works with the greys I've applied to keep that transition in the shadows, but while really brightening up the upwards facing areas. With the white scar applied, the undershading is now finished, and it's time to actually paint the Cankerborn. First, with Forest Sprite Speed Paint, I'm going to paint all of the skin. I'm being careful to make sure I don't paint this over any areas that aren't the skin, although I am painting over the eyes, teeth and a few details on the face, because I will tidy these areas up later before painting these details. I'm catching all of the skin with a single layer of Forest Sprite, letting the undershade work with the paint to bring out the details on the model and getting the best result out the speed paint. There are some areas to be careful to avoid painting near the skin, but by being careful and just applying the paint over the areas of skin, just a single layer of Forest Sprite will give a great looking skin to this model. With the skin painted, you can see how the undershade works really well with these paints to bring out all of those details. Now with warrior skin, I'm painting the fleshy areas on the model. There are parts of hanging flesh on the model, which I'm carefully painting. On the back of the model, there are some more of these hanging fleshy areas, as well as some flatter areas. The warrior skin speed paint works really well with these areas to bring out the detail and add some contrast to these areas of the model, as well as to the green of the skin. I'm also picking out this detail on the sword. A bit of overspill onto the blade here won't matter too much, but I'm still being careful to keep this just over the detail. The warrior skin here will give the impression of a sort of living blade, perfect for a nurgle model. With the warrior's flesh applied, it's added some nice contrast to the skin. Next, with Desolate Brown, I'm going to paint the strapping on the handle to the sword, as well as any other rope or straps on the model. This sculpt has some strapping holding the Rawk to the horns. The other Cankerborn has some different straps as well. And with the straps painted, next I'm going to paint the bone. For this I'm using pallid bone. There are some skulls poking out of the rocky area on the back of the Cankerborn. The pallid bone works really well with the undershading and will give some really nice looking skulls, especially once the Rawk has been painted around them. I'm also painting the hooves as well. As these are a bit darker, it will give a different effect than the skulls, allowing the same paint to be used on different areas. With the skulls and hooves painted, next I'm going to tidy up a few details. For this I'm using white scar, and I'm going to paint the eyes, sinking a bit of white scar into the recesses of the eye sockets. I'm also catching the teeth with white scar as well, and the tentacles on the chin. I'm painting these areas with white scar, so later on I can paint them with different colours, but I needed to paint over the green that was painted on these areas first, while I was painting the skin. I'm also picking out all of the spines poking out from the skin. There are quite a lot of these, but they are easy to pick out with white scar, and it's much quicker to pick out these areas with white than it would have been to try and avoid them while painting the skin. If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. And if you'd like to support the channel, please become a member by pressing the join button down below or joining me over on Patreon. And now that those details have been painted white, it's time to continue painting the Cankerborn. With some Gravelord Grey, I'm going to paint the rocky area. With this, I'm painting all over the rock texture, being careful to avoid the skulls as well as the horns, but I do want to get a solid coat of Gravelord Grey all over the rocks. This paint gives a really nice rock effect to the model, and the undershading works really well to give a great looking effect after just a single coat. With the Rawk painted, the model is really starting to come together. Now with some plasmatic bolt, I'm going to paint the stone on the chest. This paint will give a slight glowing effect to the stone, creating a slightly ethereal look to this area and adding some interest to the model. At this stage, I'm also painting the small stone hanging from the horn and the one on the base with plasmatic blue. Now with the stones painted, it's added some brightness to the Mini. Next, with some Skeleton Horde contrast paint, I'm going to paint the horns, making sure that I don't accidentally paint over the skin or rock. I'm also going to paint the teeth, so I'll have that dirty, nurgly effect. And with the skeleton horn, I'm also painting all of the spines coming out of the skin. I'm trying to only paint over the spines and avoid catching the skin, but a little bit of overspill is okay. When the paint first goes over the spines, it's going to look very light, but once it starts to dry, it should darken down and give a great looking effect. With the skeleton horde applied, the model's almost ready for the tabletop. Now with some broadsword silver, I'm going to paint the sword, being careful around the area I painted with warrior skin, but making sure that I paint all of the blade with silver. I've really started to like this broadsword silver speed paint. It gives really nice coverage with a single coat, and it does give some degree of shading and highlighting. With the blade painted, next I'm going to paint the hilt. For this I'm using Hoplite Gold, and I'm carefully picking out the spiky ball on the top of the sword with some gold. With the sword painted, there's just a few details left to pick out. Using Iron Jaws yellow, I'm going to paint those eyes. I'm carefully sinking the yellow into the eye sockets, covering the areas that I painted with white earlier. This yellow will give really bright eyes to the Cankerborn, adding some personality to the model. With the eyes picked out, now I'm going to paint the pupils. For this I'm using Abaddon Black. I'm very carefully painting a small vertical line in the middle of the eyes. This black line will give a kind of cat's eye effect, which will add to the monstrous look of the Mini. And after painting the eyes, next I'm going to paint the tentacles coming out of the chins. For this, I'm using Purple Swarm. I'm being really careful here to avoid painting over the skin, just catching these sort of tentacle-like areas with a layer of purple. The little pop of extra colour will add some interest to the model, and while still keeping that nurgle look to the Cankerborn. With the tentacles painted, the only thing left to paint now are the saws and boils. For this, I'm using Murder Scene. And first, I'm painting the boils coming out of the sword. And also the open sores that I painted with white earlier, sinking some of the paint into the wounds. This paint has a really nice reddish purple colour to it and works really well to give the impression of painful open sores. A little bit of overspill when painting these sores is okay. It will give a bit of a transition between the skin and the wounds, but I do want to keep these as tidy as possible. And then there's also the boils on the skin, which I'm also painting with Murder Skin. As I didn't paint over these with white, it's going to give a different appearance to that of the open sores, and I'm just applying a small amount of this paint over the boils so they look bruised and painful, really giving that nurgle look to the Cankerborn. With the sores and boils painted, you could leave the model here, but there is one final step that I'm going to apply. With some dirty down rust effects, I'm applying some rust to the blade of the sword. This paint gives a really realistic looking rust effects when it dries. As often is the case when painting effects, less is more. I don't want to paint too much rust, just enough to give the impression of an old dirty blade, something befitting of a nurgle monster. And with the rust painted, that is the Cankerborn for Warhammer Quest Darkwater painted. What do you think of this quick method of painting? And what mini from Darkwater would you like to see me paint next? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you would like, you can join me for free over on Patreon. And happy painting!